My first long-form versus video was Darth Vader versus Grandmaster Yoda, titled The Broken and the Sage. As of October 11th, 2022, that video is now 10 years old. Unfortunately, it has since been blocked due to copyright infringement, specifically music. YouTube was a much different landscape back then. To commemorate the anniversary and to return this classic to the fans, I have prepared this remastered version using the original voiceover. This video, and the matchup in general, has been one of my most controversial, and I will admit that I did deliberately cultivate that. No such thing as bad press. But regardless of what you think about my argument and conclusions, there is no questioning that this is a seminal work, the first 40-minute versus video, the first demonstration of just how far we could take this. However, in retrospect, I wish I had been more moderate and balanced in both my arguments and my delivery, and built up to my conclusions more gently. Instead, I am having to backpedal from a very extreme position that was predicated on both an unreasonable anti-Yoda bias and my own tendency towards black and white reasoning. In summary, I still believe that Darth Vader would defeat Grandmaster Yoda, but rather than the curbstomp victory outlined in this video, I believe he would be pulling a Teneb Kel and scraping by against an opponent who outclasses him, with his victory being heavily predicated on Yoda's complacency and arrogance. I regard Yoda as the ultimate example of a big fish in a small pond, and I don't think he would take Vader seriously, instead treating him like Dooku and playing with his food instead of going in for the kill, in the process handing the tactical initiative to Vader. Though Antoine Bandelay's 2017 rebuttal video and Evan Nova 95's 2019 Who Wins video were both addressed to my 2017 remake rather than the original 2012 version, I am well aware that people want to hear my thoughts on them. In my opinion, Antoine's rebuttal demonstrated a pro-Yoda bias that was every bit as extreme as my anti-Yoda bias, with his following Yoda vs. Luke Skywalker video making quite clear that Grandmaster Luke is the only character within the Star Wars setting that Antoine is willing to acknowledge is capable of defeating Yoda, and even that admission was loaded with caveats. As for Evan's Who Wins video, I found it to be much more balanced, addressing many of the core points in both my video and Antoine's, while also providing his own argument. And I've actually re-watched this video several times just for the viewing pleasure. Evan may have ruled in favor of Yoda, but he at least acknowledged Vader's threat level and stressed that Yoda would not be able to take him lightly. Before I move on to the video proper, a few notes on the analyses. It follows my outdated format from the early 2020s and was created prior to both the Expanded Universe Purge of 2014 and my own decision to omit the 2008 Clone Wars animated series from most of my discussions of Clone Wars era characters. As I've discussed before, my vitriol towards the series comes from me being a disillusioned fan who started out liking it. In the case of Yoda, his early season appearances were actually fun additions, while his later season appearances, which post-dated this video, came at the direct expense of various significant Expanded Universe storylines that form major linchpins in my analyses of Yoda. You cannot reconcile Yoda Dark Rendezvous or the 2002 Clone Wars microseries with Seasons 6 and 7 of TCW, whereas the long-standing contradictions between the microseries and Labyrinth of Evil are comparatively minor. Anywho, I think I've prattled on for long enough. Please enjoy the video.
Darth Vader was a lightsaber prodigy at a very young age, and was one of the most renowned Jedi swordsmen and warriors prior to his fall. Vader was a high-level master of the Djem-so lightsaber style, a variation on the Shien style that focused on lightsaber dueling and brute strength. A highly creative fighter, Vader mixed and matched forms, including elements of all lightsaber forms in a personalized hybrid built around Djem-so, with Makashi, Surisu, Ataru, and Shien all featuring heavily. Thanks to Djem-so's focus on brute force, which put Vader's cybernetically augmented strength to good use, Vader was an overwhelmingly powerful fighter, and even his most casual moves had the potential to stagger opponents. In addition, Vader was highly precise in his moves, demonstrating a lot of manual dexterity, the obvious influence of Makashi. These focuses on strength and precision helped compensate for Vader's hampered mobility, a consequence of the heavy armor and prosthesis built into his body. Now, in previous videos dealing with Vader, my mention of Vader's hampered mobility seems to have given you all the idea that Vader is some immovable rock who's easy to outmaneuver. However, when examining Vader's combat performance and his track record, this idea just doesn't hold water. Vader has successfully engaged opponents who are more agile than him multiple times before, and has held his own against multiple duelists with little effort. And on that note, Vader is highly effective against multiple opponents and groups. He is also quite skilled at blast deflection, and even has some skill as a marksman, wielding a blaster rifle as a secondary weapon, though obviously he prefers to avoid doing so due to his ingrained distaste for blasters. And on the topic of secondary weapons, Vader had trained with and applied dual-blade combat as a Jedi, going so far as to study Nyman to further develop his skills in this type of combat. However, he has never applied dual-blade fencing in live combat as a Sith Lord, clearly preferring to use a single blade. Vader was also a highly capable unarmed fighter. Initially, his skills in this area were due primarily to his cybernetics, a guy with metal hands having obvious advantages when fist fighting, though he gradually developed a sophisticated bare-handed fighting method. A tactical genius, Vader understands when to cut loose and plow through his opponents, and when to hold back and settle in for the long haul. Vader has learned from the examples of both of his masters, understanding that a fight is never a goal in itself. Sometimes it is simply a distraction from the true goal, and best countered with a larger distraction. Vader is especially talented at the larger distraction end of things, and many of his most successful battles have been deep and far-reaching psychological manipulations. Terror is a weapon that Vader wields with practiced ease, and his accomplishments mark him as a master of the Sith Dun Mosh technique. In keeping with this, Vader is highly skilled at chaining force-based attacks into his lightsaber sequences, thrashing his opponents with anything not bolted down in terrifying displays of power, sometimes while simultaneously attacking them with his lightsaber. On the offensive, Darth Vader was relentless and powerful, but also highly varied, sometimes using vicious power blows, other times more controlled precision attacks. Whatever the case, he was always completely uncompromising, crisp and unpredictable. His defense was strong, thanks to Djem-so's focus on defense and immediate counterattack. However, he did experience the occasional defensive lapse, though his armor allowed him to shrug off otherwise disabling lightsaber hits. Overall, Vader demonstrated a strong and efficient technique. Though he lacked mobility, he more than made up for this through tactical ingenuity. Jedi Grandmaster Yoda was one of the greatest lightsaber duelists of his age, though I personally challenge the idea that he is the greatest. Yoda was a sophisticated duelist with massive amounts of skill and experience, a master of all 7 classical lightsaber forms. Yoda strongly favored the Ataru style. Ataru was the 4th Jedi form, a fast-paced fighting style with a heavy focus on speed and agility. To compensate for his short stature and lack of reach, Yoda took Ataru to its highest possible level and displayed amazing speed and dexterity, calling heavily on the Force to allow him to leap and spin about in phenomenal ways. Yoda's application of Ataru was very pure and demonstrated a back-to-basics mentality, and was nothing more than the core elements of the style, the Su-Ma rotations, taken to their nth degree. And it's here that the primary flaw in Yoda's technique begins to emerge, his complete lack of any creativity or imagination. In a nutshell, Yoda's application of Ataru is so by the book and basic that it's downright Puritan. While Yoda clearly does switch from form to form based on his situational needs, he doesn't mix and match moves from different styles, or modify any of the pre-existing methods in any way, shape, or form. He doesn't retool or innovate, he sticks to the standard. Whenever he applies Ataru, it's pure Ataru and nothing but Ataru. Whenever he applies Surisu, you get the idea. Yoda's only real edge was his Force-enhanced speed and agility, which allowed him to mount a thoroughly overwhelming offense, until his stamina gave out. However, while Yoda's lightsaber technique was by the book and unimaginative, it was still perfectly serviceable and effective. Yoda was highly effective against multiple opponents and groups, and had zero difficulty with blast deflection. While Yoda has used punches and kicks while fighting with his lightsaber, he had never actually used physical combat when unarmed, instead falling back on his Force abilities. While Yoda had plenty of skill at chaining Force-based attacks into his lightsaber sequences, freely applying this technique against non-Force wielders, he strongly refrained when engaging other Force wielders, preferring to rely purely on lightsaber combat. This trend was perfectly demonstrated during his duel with Palpatine in the Senate arena. When Palpatine claimed the tactical high ground and began throwing Senate pods at Yoda from a distance, Yoda initially attempted to close the distance and re-engage with his lightsaber, only resorting to countering with telekinesis when it became clear that he had no other choice. Even then, as soon as he forced Palpatine to give up the high ground, Yoda's first response was to close the distance and draw his lightsaber. Likely, Yoda's tendency to rely purely on lightsaber attacks when combating other Force wielders was due to their ability to defend themselves against such an assault, rendering the effort moot. Also, Yoda lacked the physical strength and weight required to make power attacks a viable option, and his reliance on acrobatics certainly didn't help, as they robbed him of any leverage that might be gained through footwork. However, as previously mentioned, Yoda's technique was still effective and intelligently developed, despite his obvious limitations as a fighter. No, Yoda's primary weakness was his borderline incompetence as a tactician. In this, I am referring exclusively to his tactics in single combat. On the battlefield, Yoda is nothing short of brilliant. He darts around picking off enemies, all the while promoting confusion and disarray. Thanks to his intelligent tactics on the battlefield, Yoda has single-handedly destroyed entire armies by essentially tricking them into self-destructing, using their numbers and resources against them. In single combat, however, Yoda is far less adept. When combat begins in earnest, Yoda's first impulse is to draw his lightsaber and power through his opponents with an Ataru frenzy. Failing that, he may attempt to power through with his Force abilities. Failing that, he's got nothing because he's exhausted himself in the first 5 minutes. Powering through his opponents was Yoda's first, last, and only response, and as a result he was extremely predictable. Easily the only reason for Yoda's success rate was his overwhelming power in the Force, which allowed him to crush all but the most elite of opponents. Because of this, Yoda never had any incentive to develop his technique or his tactics beyond the basics that he has so thoroughly mastered, simply because these basics have never failed him. Whenever on the offensive, which was most of the time, Yoda was absolutely overwhelming, striking with the supernatural strength and speed afforded to him by the Force. However, he could only keep up this assault for a relatively short time before tiring. Defensively, he was minimalist in his moves, relying on subtle dodges and efficient parries, backed up by the fact that he was such a small target. Quite a powerful defense, easily a match for Obi-Wan Kenobi's Surisu-style defense. It's a shame that Yoda doesn't make greater use of it. On the whole, Yoda's technique was extremely limited but serviceable, though his tactics were practically non-existent. Yoda is a grade A example of victory disease. Yoda has an obvious and definite advantage in terms of speed and agility, but let's not forget that Vader has successfully fought against faster and more nimble opponents before. While I'm willing to concede that Vader has no way of countering Yoda's frenzy, he would be able to hold him off. Agility isn't necessarily required to combat agility, and we've seen plenty of opponents who've remained in stationary defensive positions while engaging more agile opponents, allowing the more agile opponents to wear themselves out trying to keep up the pressure, then making their move once they tire. This is a method that Vader is especially skilled at, and on a purely technical level, it's all you need when you're engaging Yoda, because of his limited stamina. Simply put, just play the Surisu card against him, settle in for the long haul and wait him out, because once Yoda tires, he has nothing. While Yoda has a very strong defense and is fully capable of relying on a more efficient fighting technique, tactically, he just doesn't seem to understand when to hold off and play it smart. He just takes off and tries to power through. And this is precisely the sort of thing that Vader has learned from experience not to do, and he has figured out how to counter it. Granted, Vader's capabilities in this regard aren't 100% effective all the time, and he has succumbed to brute force offenses before, but that's for a different video. And on the topic of actual brute force, Yoda just can't summon the necessary levels of physical strength to actually force his way through Vader's guard. I'm not saying he wouldn't be able to hold off Vader's power attacks, seeing as Yoda has held off committed power blows from individuals twice his size before, but he wouldn't be able to respond in kind. Vader also has an additional edge in the variety of methods that he has spent years developing. For starters, Vader has applied advanced and powerful telekinetic attacks against enemies while simultaneously attacking them with his lightsaber, something that Yoda has never quite pulled off. Yoda is very purist in how he does things. He's either relying purely on lightsaber combat or purely on his force abilities. He's never mixing and matching them. Essentially, Yoda's primary weakness is that he is a true one-trick pony. His number one tactic in a lightsaber duel is to power through his opponents with a barrage of lightsaber attacks and try to take him down as fast as he can. And all of his skills are devoted to this tactic. He may be able to put up an efficient and damn near impenetrable defense, but this doesn't mean anything when he is devoting everything 100% to attacking. And now we are back at the beginning, with Yoda keeping up the pressure, but Vader holding out and waiting out. Darth Vader gets the edge as a martial artist. While Vader certainly wasn't some immovable rock, he did suffer from hampered mobility thanks to the weight of his prosthesis and armor, but he compensated for this with mechanically augmented strength and stamina. Vader had the ability to lift a full-grown human male off the ground with an outstretched arm. Thanks to the armor protecting his remaining organic components, not to mention a continuous dose of painkiller, Vader was highly resistant to pain, and was able to shrug off otherwise disabling injuries. Vader has even withstood immediate proximity to a grenade explosion, and suffered only cosmetic damage to his suit. Though he was reliant on the respirator built into his suit to breathe, Vader could temporarily heal his lung damage through his rage, though only for a short while. Darth Vader has been shot, torched with a flamethrower, exposed to hard vacuum, even been buried alive, and he's still walked away. While Yoda is a member of an extremely long-lived species, he is still near the end of his life, and is accordingly saddled with many of the infirmities of old age. He suffers from crippling arthritis and joint pain, and experiences noticeable difficulty when walking, demonstrating an irregular limping gait, and relying heavily on his cane to maintain his mobility. In addition, he is of extremely short stature, which makes him a small target. It also drastically limits his reach and leverage. Yoda is heavily reliant on the Force Valor ability to compensate for his physical shortcomings, though this reliance negatively affects his stamina. It's the same sort of idea as pumping nitrous oxide through a car engine. Your car runs faster, but the engine wears out more quickly. Vader gets the obvious physical edge, being tougher, stronger, and not nearly so reliant on the Force. While Vader's cybernetics are vulnerable to Force lightning, this weakness doesn't really count in this contest because Yoda is incapable of lightning. Despite the detriments imposed on him by his extensive cybernetics and consequently diminished Force abilities, Darth Vader remained a powerful Darksider. Even with his armor and cybernetics hampering his mobility, Vader's speed and reflexes were still superhuman, and when he needed to, he could briefly overcome his physical deficiencies through judicious applications of Force speed. His telekinetic skills were highly advanced, and he has been shown incorporating such attacks into his lightsaber sequences, a technique heavily informed by his knowledge of the Sith Dun Mosh tactic. One of Vader's preferred methods of killing was telekinetic strangulation, and he has even been known to use this against Jedi, breaking through their Force shields and choking them out. He had little difficulty with lifting and throwing massively heavy objects, and generally specialized in ruining people's days. Vader's telepathic skills were also extremely advanced, and he has been able to contact and probe the minds of numerous subjects, even Force wielders, both willing and unwilling. Vader has even telepathically assaulted enemies before, freezing them in place while he finished them. Due to his prosthetic arms, Vader was incapable of utilizing Force lightning, and any attempt to do so would only cause it to backfire on him. He compensated for this with the obscure ability known as kinetite, a blast of pure, glowing kinetic energy. However, he has only exhibited this ability once, while in close proximity to the Kyber crystal, an artifact that empowers Force wielders. Vader had also used Sith magic to turn a subject into a Rakghoul monster, though he only did this once, and was again in close proximity to another Force-boosting artifact, the Mur Talisman. Neither kinetite nor Sith magic are likely to come into play, as Vader is in possession of neither the Kyber crystal nor the Myrrh talisman. Vader is also capable of using Tutaminis to absorb and deflect blaster bolts with his hand. On the whole, while the scope of Vader's abilities were relatively limited by his cybernetics, and most energy-based attacks were impossible for him to execute, his applications of the abilities that he did have at his disposal were extremely fluid and varied. Vader had a lot of practice at using the Force in situ, when conditions are not perfect and there are plenty of distractions. Simply being Darth Vader is a distraction unto itself. One thing that a lot of people either forget or don't know is that Vader's immolation was traumatic in ways that went far beyond physical pain. He was crippled in every sense of the word. Physically, he was now a quadruple amputee and couldn't survive without the bionic lung built into his chest and armor. And then consider that because most of his nerve endings were fried, and because his eyeballs were exposed to intense heat and his eardrums were melted, all of his senses were basically dead. The only thing he was even remotely capable of feeling by the time Palpatine picked him up was sheer, mind-numbing pain. And even in the armor, pumped full of chemical painkillers 24/7, he still experienced almost constant torment. Every second of every day as Darth Vader is endless torture. But all of this is nothing compared to how it affected his ability to sense and use the Force. The novel Star Wars The Clone Wars Wild Space has a scene where Ahsoka Tano looks at Anakin Skywalker and tries to imagine what it's like to be him in a very physical sense. The thing she fixated on was his prosthetic arm, and this is where we learn something about how Force wielders live and feel. The Force is generated by life, living tissue. To be a trained Force wielder is to feel the current of energy passing through your body, passing through your living tissue. So what is it like to have that circuit interrupted by, say, a prosthetic limb? Now expand that question to include half your body. The Revenge of the Sith novelization features a passage that essentially answers that question. I will read it to you now. And you rage and scream and reach through the Force to crush the shadow who has destroyed you. But you are so far less now than what you were. You are more than half machine. You are like a painter gone blind, a composer gone deaf. You can remember where the power was, but the power you can touch is only a memory. So with all of your world-destroying fury, it is only droids around you that implode, and equipment, and the table on which you are strapped which shatters, and in the end, you cannot touch the shadow. In the end, you don't even want to. Because his very ability to wield the Force had been crippled, Vader was forced to start from scratch and retool all of his methods to compensate for his handicap. And the irony is that he became better afterwards than he was to begin with, because he had to rebuild himself from the ground up. Yes, Vader will never have what he could have had, but he knows how to make what he does have count. Jedi Grandmaster Yoda was considered the greatest master of the Force of his day, and had over 800 years of experience as a Force wielder. One of Yoda's most visible powers was his application of Force Valor, which allowed him to empower his body and overcome his physical limitations, demonstrating superhuman speed, strength, and agility. This ability is strongly tied to his lightsaber skills, with such physical augmentation being one of the basic prerequisites for the Ataru style. However, Yoda's application of this ability was not unlimited. Perhaps the best allegory for this power is pumping nitrous oxide through a car engine. Your car goes faster, but the engine wears out more quickly. In the case of Yoda, his reliance on this power compromises his stamina, and he was only able to keep fighting for a relatively limited period of time. Yoda's telekinetic abilities were also highly advanced, and he was able to move and manipulate extremely large objects, seemingly with no upper limit. However, while he can lift individual objects of almost any size, he seems to be limited in the number of objects he can manipulate at any one time. Since he passed age 700, he has only been able to lift 5 of the 6 Montur stones while in meditation, each of the stones weighing several tons. However, while he is limited in the number of heavy objects he can influence, he throws about smaller ones with consummate ease, and when given time to focus and concentrate, he has even influenced hundreds at a time. During the Battle of Coruscant, he forced entire ranks of droids back into their transports before forcing the transports themselves to collide with one another. Yoda's combative applications of telekinesis were also powerful and overwhelming, and he has used powerful force waves to destroy entire armies. He was even able to catch Darth Sidious off guard with a powerful force push. However, Yoda's combative powers are partly compromised by his need to pause for a moment to gather his energies. He isn't able to unleash rapid-fire telekinetic blasts, and is fairly staid in his execution. Yoda's telepathic abilities were also extremely advanced, and he had little difficulty mind-tricking specific targets, and has even influenced the memories of subjects, among other things erasing their knowledge of his own existence. The absolute pinnacle of Yoda's telepathic ability was the battle meditation, which allowed him to affect the outcome of entire battles by bolstering the morale of his allies while demoralizing the enemy. Yoda was also capable of the Tutaminis ability, deflecting, absorbing, and redirecting force lightning, among other things. On the whole, Yoda has a massive amount of magnitude and has mastery of several arcane and rarely seen techniques, but is partly undone by his need to concentrate and gather his energies. The problem with Yoda is that all of his efforts are effectively devoted to his quest for enlightenment, so he spends most of his time communing with the Force while in meditation. Since all of Yoda's applications of the Force on his own time are done while in this state, he's used to always having time to concentrate and gather his energies, and being free from distraction. As a result, his ability to use the Force in situ is hampered by the fact that he just doesn't have the limitless energy and freedom from distraction that he's used to having. In a nutshell, Yoda's problem is that he's too much the armchair academic Force wielder. As a result of always having it easy, his applications are incredibly staid and unimaginative, because he always had the available energy at his disposal to simply brute force his way through whatever task he is attempting. And because he's so used to having this unlimited energy that he gets through meditation, even his more minor powers call for a lot of concentration and effort. He can't surprise his foes. His only edge is his ability to overwhelm through sheer magnitude. Darth Vader is very much a tank devoted to overwhelming strength and power, yet ironically he demonstrates more refinement and fluidity in his Force abilities than Yoda does. Yoda clearly beats Vader's shiny metal ass in terms of sheer magnitude, yet most of his applications of the Force, especially those that would be required to take down Vader, require lengthy concentration to execute, and this is something he wouldn't have time for in a pitched battle. Vader, on the other hand, can keep up powerful wavefront telekinetic assaults with relatively little effort, even continuing to attack with his lightsaber in the midst of such offensives. While Yoda is clearly the greater Force wielder in terms of knowledge and magnitude, Vader has greater fluidity and refinement, and as a result, greater combat effectiveness. Darth Vader gets the edge as a Force wielder. Darth Vader's lightsaber, simply put, is a power tool. Following a heavy-duty design typical of Form 5 specialists, Vader's lightsaber features a large, ridged hand grip, a throttle-style activator, and a heavy emitter shroud. Mechanically, it utilizes a single, heavy-duty diadium power cell, and a red-hued synthetic crystal as the focusing lens. The lightsaber includes a dual phase function, allowing Vader to switch back and forth between two preset blade lengths with the flip of a switch. The lengths he favors seem to be a standard blade length of 1 meter and a considerably longer 1.5 meter blade, allowing him to attack from a distance. Yoda wields a lightsaber shii-cho, or short sword, which, for someone of his height, is a standard-sized weapon. His lightsaber is absolutely ancient, though aesthetically, its design is quite contemporary. Heavy emitter shroud, a throttle-style activator, and a ridged hand grip. He uses a single green-hued Adagan crystal as his focusing lens. The lightsaber shows its age in the pits and scratches on the body of the hilt, though it functions perfectly well, so it is evidently well maintained. Even were Yoda capable of wielding a standard lightsaber, I would still give Vader's weapon the edge because of the dual phase function. The ability to change the length of your lightsaber blade with the flip of a switch is a massive advantage because it provides options in combat. This advantage is made even more apparent due to Yoda's usage of the shii-cho. On a normal-sized duelist, a shii-cho allows for greater control and faster defense. On Yoda, however, it's of standard size and just contributes to his lack of reach. Darth Vader's lightsaber gets the edge. And now, the verdict. I think you all know which way I'm going with this, the contrarian ideal. To sum it all up, Yoda can't take Vader. Now don't get me wrong, despite the massive flaws in Yoda's technique, the lack of creativity in his moves, his poor stamina, the lack of any leverage or power, his method is still serviceable and could be effective against Vader if applied properly. No! Yoda's primary weakness is his overcommitment to offense ahead of tactical ingenuity. Despite being a strategic genius in any other situation, in single combat he will always attempt to simply power through his opponents, and as a result he is extremely predictable, and his tactical errors completely undo what could otherwise be a reasonably effective fighting method. While Yoda is capable of mounting a highly efficient and impenetrable defense, he never does. He will always rely, first and foremost, on offense. And due to the flamboyant nature of his offensive technique, i.e. Ataru, coupled with Yoda's physical weakness, requiring heavy reliance on the Force to do much of anything, his stamina is shit. He can only keep fighting for a few minutes at a stretch, and once he tires, his only remaining option is usually to make himself scarce. and we haven't even addressed the limitations inherent to his Force abilities yet. Yoda is clearly a master of the Force with great understanding and power, and is definitely further along the road to enlightenment than Vader. However, I'm not gauging spiritual integrity or inner clarity. I am gauging combat effectiveness. And as a combative Force wielder, Yoda is rife with limitations. Simply put, he is too much the academic, used to the perfect conditions that one would find in the meditation chamber. He is used to having time to concentrate and gather his energies, and as a result experiences clear difficulty when it comes to pulling Force abilities out of his sleeve without warning. Granted, he can do some quite sophisticated and amazing things, when given time to concentrate. Without that time, even a simple Force push is a serious effort on Yoda's part. And when we turn our gaze to Darth Vader, we see a different package entirely. Yoda is the gifted prodigy who's been content to spend centuries simply refining the basics. Vader is the crippled student who's needed to work twice as hard to accomplish what others do with ease, and as a result is better than all of them after having had to work through his weaknesses. Yoda is the gifted pianist who just plays the same old melodies again and again without trying anything new. Vader is Beethoven gone deaf. He can remember where the power was, but the power he can touch is only a memory. So he needs to work with what he has and make it count. All of Vader's skills are the result of decades of practice and innovation, all to compensate for his variety of handicaps. His lightsaber fighting style is a sophisticated hybrid form built on Jensaarai. The only thing that has reliably broken through Vader's guard has been overwhelming strength, which Yoda completely lacks, his small size leaving him with little reach or leverage. There is no way Yoda could penetrate Vader's defenses, and even if he did, Vader's cybernetics would reduce whatever got through to a painful irritation. Vader has shrugged off the loss of limbs and kept on fighting. What's Yoda going to do? Bleed on him? His methods with the Force are precise and unpredictable, coming from a variety of angles. Yoda would be hard-pressed to defend against the fluidity and diversity of Vader's assault. In a nutshell, Yoda's tactical predictability plays to Vader's advantage, and his inefficiency and poor stamina limit the duration of time that he could keep up his offense, and he wouldn't be able to bring his great power and the Force to bear because Vader wouldn't allow him the time necessary to gather his energies for anything more than a basic Force push. In the end, Yoda can't take Vader because he doesn't have the necessary stamina to hold out against him in the long run, nor is his speed and agility sufficient to break through Vader's defense and take him down fast. Vader's physical advantages are more than Yoda can handle, already overwhelming physical capabilities backed up by the cybernetics protecting his body, making him incredibly tough. While I do acknowledge that there is the distinct possibility that Yoda could beat Vader, it's hardly a sure thing. I'd put Yoda's odds at taking Vader down at 1 chance in 6. By these odds, Vader is clearly the superior fighter and he takes the gold. However, while Yoda's unimaginative and staid methods wouldn't grant him sure victory against his opponent, I do acknowledge that he would drive Vader onto his back foot, maybe even forcing him to resort to desperate or risky tactics. And when all was said and done, Vader would be battered and leaking transmission fluid, and he would definitely be spending a few weeks in the infirmary. All that being said, it's now done. I declare Darth Vader the winner.